controlling gravity with small amounts of electromagnetic stress energy densities. This talk was assisted by Dr. Christoph Meyer and also Elon Musk's artificial intelligence Grok 3. This is the military data, the 6 observables, instantaneous apparent accelerations and 90-degree turns, hypersonic velocities without signatures, low observability, cloaking, transmedium travel, that means going from the water, from the ocean or the Mediterranean Sea into the atmosphere, positive lift, anti-gravity, biological effects. The biological effects are from the anti-gravity blue shift, which is opposite, of course, to the attractive gravity red shift. And it's the anti-gravity blue shift on these vehicles that ionizes the atmosphere and causes basically radiation sickness. And over 100 military personnel have gotten ill from too close contact with these craft. Stanford University professor Gary Nolan is analyzing the blood from these military victims. This is fact. This is not science fiction. This picture is a summary of how time travel to the past really does work, using Roger Penrose's intuitive picture of space-time curvature as the relative tilting of neighboring light cones. Also, you may read in some of the literature that a time machine cannot go back to before its moment of creation. That is a false idea. That's an incorrect idea. It's based on the notion of that we're restricted to closed time-like curves, which is not at all the case as we see in this particular picture. We can argue this with my colleagues at another venue. In this short 12-minute presentation, we don't have time to get into the details of how this really does work. I present military observational evidence that Einstein's coupling of stress energy current densities of the electromagnetic field to the gravity field is a controllable variable inside matter with electromagnetic dispersion. The effective coupling in the simplest case is given by the equations you see here, and I'll skip that. Basically, what I'm saying is that the effect of the active matter depends on some of its electromagnetic properties, like the relative electric permittivity and the relative magnetic permeability. A test of this hypothesis has been proposed by Dr. Michael G. Anderson of the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in a hot plasma warp reactor, in which the relative electric permittivity of the hot ion plasma is as high as 10 to the 16. It's a pure number, of course. It's the relative permittivity, dimensionless, like the fine structure constant. We also propose a much simpler, cheaper, modified Cavendish experiment involving the prediction that in water, if we start with large spheres of ice and let it slowly melt to water at room temperature, that there will be a change in the active gravitational mass of the water, which can be tracked by noticing a predicted shift in the angle theta, the angular separation of the pair of large masses from the small mass. And of course, the plane of that swing must be perpendicular to the Earth's gravitational field, so that we also predict that a continuous monitoring of the weight of the melting ice will not change, because the weight depends upon the passive gravitational mass, in the gravitational field of the Earth, which is at right angles to the plane of the swing of the attraction of the large masses to the small masses. So what we're saying is that um, under certain conditions, for dielectrics, not so much for metallic conductors, but for dielectrics, the active mass causing gravitational fields is not the same as the passive mass which responds to gravitational fields. The weak equivalence principle only demands that the passive gravitational mass is identical to the inertial mass, and this again is only for test particles in an external gravitational field. Einstein's famous E equals mc squared, the m, the mass there, is the inertial mass. So for example, in an atomic bomb explosion, it's a small change in the inertial mass, which is the same as the passive gravity mass. It has nothing whatsoever conceptually to do with the active mass that actually generates the self field, which in the case of, say, a nuclear bomb explosion, the self field of the uranium or the plutonium or whatever is exploding is irrelevant to that process. Okay. This is a 2002 paper by Ray Chow. And by the way, Ray studied with John Archibald Wheeler at Princeton, then got on to do his PhD with Charles Towns, one of the inventors of the laser, and then was for almost 40 years a professor of physics at Berkeley, having many important students like Ephraim Steinberg, who does these brilliant Yakia Aharonov weak measurement experiments at the University, I believe, in Toronto. In any case, Ray showed in 2002 that the coupling constant between, say, electromagnetism and gravity in Einstein's theory of general relativity, that coupling constant is not a fixed universal constant as people think. It's not restricted to be roughly 10 to the minus 43 reciprocal newtons, because if that were the case, Ray proves using the Kramers-Kronig dispersion relations required by retarded causality, in other words, that there only be past causes of present effects, at least in this classical level, that causality would be violated if the coupling constant were really a fixed constant that couldn't be changed. And there's also a lot of confusion in the field by people who should know better, by the pundits, where they confuse the local invariance of the vacuum speed of light required by special relativity. They confuse that. They say, oh, the speed of light must be constant, and they don't, constant, what does that mean? Homogeneity, not isotropic. In any case, there's a lot of confusion. People don't think very clearly about the foundations of relativity. And I mean, even some of my colleagues who write correct mathematical papers in the field, but without really understanding the physical meaning of the mathematics they're writing down, in my opinion anyway. The previous couple of slides were simply excerpts from Ray Chow's paper that you could read on your own. And I just want to emphasize here, it's important to understand that Ray Chow, in his 2002 paper, does not connect his phenomenological, purely gravitational spin 2 emergent constituent parameters with their underlying electromagnetic spin 1 and spin 1/2 parameters. That is, there is no explicit connection of gravity to electromagnetism in Chow's 2002 paper. He only uses an analogy. It was not until my October 2011 DARPA NASA Orlando talk that I unified Chow's use of Einstein's pure spin 2 gravity theory with Maxwell's spin 1 electromagnetism into a truly electrogravitic warp wormhole time travel to past Popper falsifiable theory explaining the 6 UAP observables in an obvious way. Now, Eric Weinstein claims that Louis Witten, Bryce DeWitt, John Wheeler, Richard Feynman, and others hid all this in 1954, hiding it in plain sight by setting C equal to 1 in almost all the academic papers, which kind of misled physicists and electrical engineers who would not notice the role of electromagnetism in Einstein's gravity field equation. Now, I do not know if Eric's story is true. Wheeler and Feynman, who I knew personally and met several times, and face-to-face, one-on-one conversations, never said anything to me about it. Although the topic of the the weird desk flying saucer stuff didn't really come up as far as I recall. And also, I was with Wheeler, with Werner Heisenberg in Munich for over a month back in 1966, and the subject never came up there at the Max Planck Institute in Munich. The problem is that if you look at all the textbooks on general relativity, and including Kip Thorne's recent classical physics book of basically applied general relativity, there's no discussion of how gravity fields are generated inside complicated matter with electromagnetic dispersion. The problem is once you have dispersion, the phase speed of light depends on its frequency, and of course the group speed is different from the phase speed. It's the group speed of which energy is propagated, and you lose Lorentz invariance of the vacuum speed of light inside matter. So effectively, there's a broken Lorentz invariance, and this is pretty well known to solid state physicists. So the general idea of low power control of gravity is that you're able to increase the coupling in Einstein's, the electrogravitic coupling coefficient in Einstein's field equation. And if you hold the gravity field fixed, that you have a desired objective, a desired gravity warp field, so you keep that fixed. And if you increase the effective coupling, then the amount of stress energy source tensor you need gets smaller. So that's really the basic idea. And this was the idea I presented in the 2011 DARPA NASA 100-year Starship Orlando meeting, where I was invited and paid by General Pete Worden, who had been in the United States Air Force Space Command. He was a PhD in astrophysics, and he took over NASA Ames. I was working with some of his guys from NASA Ames in an informal way, and he invited me. I helped organize the conference, and he invited me to Orlando, where I gave this talk. The basic talk I gave in 2011 was summarized by Travis Taylor in his December 11th, 2022 tweet: control K in G equal KT and control the universe. Here is a quote from Elon Musk's Grok 3 artificial intelligence, confirming what I said in the last slide. Yes, there is an effective violation of Lorentz symmetry inside matter with dispersion for emergent, long-wave, low-frequency quasi-particles in collective modes. This arises because their dispersion relations are not Lorentz invariant and depend on the medium's rest frame and may be anisotropic as well as non-stationary, even though there is no fundamental violation at the microscopic level. Now, if you go back historically to the classic Mathematical Theory of General Relativity of Arthur Eddington, 1920s, and also the Caltech lecture book by Richard Tolman on it was on relativity, thermodynamics, and cosmology. They both, in a very glancing, peripheral way, very quickly mention that when you're inside matter, don't worry about making all the Lorentz transformations and also the general coordinate transformations of both special and general relativity. They both indicate that you don't learn anything much, just work in the rest frame. Because really, if you look at the foundations of relativity, if you look at Einstein's thought experiments, say in 1905, and even in his Einstein elevator, Einstein's always thinking the macroscopic classical theory, in which you have meter rods moving, actual clocks moving, everything's moving in vacuum, and also you're observing. You're like Alice and Bob are external observers in vacuum, and they're making remote sensing measurements of material objects in motion, and they're using light waves, which are basically far field electromagnetic signals in vacuum, which is not dispersive. If the vacuum had dispersion in it, the whole invariant structure of relativity based on the Lorentz group, for example, that would all break down. And so the people who do the mathematics of relativity, they're very good mathematicians, but they're not generally very good physicists, and they don't think about the operational meaning of their mathematics. So this is something for another venue. Again, I just mentioned it in passing, and I'll stop here.